are linked to biotechnology and water, wastewater management, both for technicians and engineers. But we also saw that, for instance, there are new business-related occupations, such as renewable energy consultants, or there are new jobs that didn't exist before. Some of the stakeholders we talked to told us about this new professional occupation, which is nutritionist engineers, who are people who master the technology, but at the same time also understand the habits of the consumer, the taste of the consumer. And what is interesting, that these new jobs are usually at the interlink between different disciplines. And we also found that there are old jobs done in a new way. Think of agronomist. I mean, agronomist is probably one of the oldest jobs, but the new abilities which are out there. And then of course, and by Ephraim before, a massive upskilling and reskilling effort, where upskilling and reskilling is not only for the high-level workers, but is also for those people who are medium-skilled and low-skilled. And in this sense, is a democratic upskilling and reskilling exercise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. This was A, very passionate, and B, very much to the point. So when Francesca said a reskilling and upskilling about not only the high-level skilled, but also the medium and low-level skilled people, it is a perfect transition to my next question, which touches on technical and vocational education. Because, as you said, it does not only need the solar engineers and the technician, like the chemists, and all of those innovators, which is very important, but it also needs the people who do maintenance, the people who work on agriculture, and like classical TVET professions that are probably going to have to change. So on that note, Haiken, the ILO, and that's part of your department, has recently developed a toolkit on greening TVET and skills development. So could you tell us a bit more what greening TVET implies? And maybe also a bit about how you would like to bring it into implementation.
So I think that was a good bridge between this demand side and then now moving to the supply side. So greening TVET and skills development can play a vital role to not only support the transforming the economies and societies for green transformation, but also lead the changes by equipping the workforces, as mentioned by the two panelists, with not only skills, but also knowledge, behaviors, and attitudes that they can utilize to transform their daily life, workplaces, communities, and societies as a whole. And greening education and training requires policy process, and it's a normative that require a clear, holistic, and comprehensive approach. In this sense, recently, a few weeks ago, the ILO has published Greening TVET and Skills Development. It's a practical tool building on earlier approaches, earlier methodologies by other international organizations, but also very numerous ILO's project experience. And it consists of 10 sections. So it provides how-to guidance on adopting or designing competency standards and curricula that is tuned to the demand of the labor market, and also how we can adapt the practices for the delivery of training and assessment methodologies. And also, not only the contents matter, but also the learning environment, the physical environment where the learning and teaching takes place matters. It has to contribute to the development of environmental awareness and also the behavior change. So we also have a guidance on how we can go green on campus and school. And moreover, as an ILO, I would like to highlight that encouraging the enterprises to join in this whole process is important. Why? They are the one who will inform this labor market, the education and training providers, what are the changing demand in the labor market, and also they are the venue where the students and trainees can go and practice their knowledge and skills that they acquire through education and training. So we also have a section on how we can sensitize enterprises in this process. Last but not least, as informal economy is very important for many low and middle income countries, we also have a guidance on how we can support the greening of the informal economy. And another one that I forgot to mention is that I guess everyone agrees the availability of teachers and trainers are also very important. So we also have a section how we can capacitate teachers and trainers. So this is an overview of more than 136 pages of our tool, which can be used independently depending on your needs. But at the same time, you can do an overall diagnosis with the tips and hints, a lot of questions that are in the tool. And we didn't want this tool to be just shelves on the bookshelf. So we tested the practicality of this tool, piloting in different countries. The piloting activity ranged from specific support measures to coaching programs. So for example, in Ghana, the tool was used to support different sectoral bodies to diagnose and to do the visioning exercises for their respective sectors. And in case of Zimbabwe, the tool came in when they already had 5 new curriculums. So this consolidated the whole process, and it supported the TVET institution action plan development. So in a nutshell, this tool is learning and action-oriented, and it's designed to support countries to take stock of where they stand in terms of greening TVET and focus on the areas for improvement. So we believe that this practical tool will support transforming the education and training for a just and green transition.
Thank you, Hakan. I want to ask you a follow-up question when you said you piloted that tool. TVET is very often a bit of a stepchild in the education system of different countries, and it is sometimes a hard sell for developing countries who are already struggling with a lot of youth unemployment, who have pressing issues, who are focused on GDP growth, to now invest into green skills and green transition, because it's sometimes seen as a developed country. It's a good thing to do, but we need to get our economy moving forward. What would be, and I would like to invite also the other panelists maybe to comment on that, what would be your selling points when you talk to governments, when you talk to them about a green transition, to kind of invest into green education and green skills building?
So thank you for the question. I think I would like to bring our ILO Global Research, which was conducted in 2019, and I would like to echo what has been mentioned previously, that of course all the occupations will change in some way in this green transition as a result of this green transition, but the most turnover of the employment will take place at the medium skill level occupation. And I think it was already mentioned by our 2 panelists. And this is where the jobs will be required, and this is where jobs will be lost. So in order to make this transition just, we need to invest in people so that they can tap into the new opportunities of newly created jobs, which will be happening many in the medium occupation level. And also for those who will be losing the jobs will be from this level. So we will need definitely invest in those skilling and upskilling so that they can move from the declining sector to the growing ones. So that will be the selling point.
Well, that's a very good question. In fact, we work with about 28 countries, and we constantly talk to the education and labor authorities. And what is, what we see in the countries where we work is that countries are already aware. They know that they have to go greener. They know that they need greener education systems, and in fact they do have some green practices. We have run 2 awards on good practices, on green practices, and you cannot imagine how many applications we received. There are many activities, many initiatives that happen, on the ground. I want to mention, for instance, the example of one of the winners of our award, which was one training center in Gaza, where there was this case of this young woman being trained in solar photovoltaic system installation, operation, and so on. She became a role model for other women and other girls in the country. So what's important for us is not that, I mean, we're not trying to sort of convince countries that they have to go greener. Our advice to the ministries and to the stakeholders is how to make it happen. They are convinced already they have to do it. So what we work on is trying ways to upstream these good initiatives, to bring them to a more systemic level, so to provide opportunities to more and more people. So it's really about how to make it happen.
I love this idea, and I think the few things I would say. First, like, green has been a luxury. Like, I think a lot of people would say that green has been a luxury good. It can't be that way anymore. That just can't be how we think about green. Like, it doesn't matter. GDP growth doesn't matter if we don't have a planet to grow GDP on. Like, I think that we have to, be direct about that. I think, TVET and vocational education in particular, like, we can't just wait for a whole new generation of workers to show up. We also have to be training existing workers and retraining existing workers right now to do their jobs more greenly. And that's where the vocational education system can be super valuable, because it can provide just-in-time, short training that any worker can avail themselves of. So I think that's another just kind of key aspect of that. And I would just say, economic growth is going to happen through green. Like, that's where the long-term economic growth is going to happen. A lot of the kind of extractive economic growth, there may be some short-term opportunities, especially in like a geopolitical environment where that may make sense. But that's not where the long-term growth is. That's not where long-term opportunities and resilient jobs are for residents. So I would challenge that. And I also think in the context of these negotiations, I think we heard Francesca mention the commitments that countries are making. Is this a vector, something that can facilitate some of the negotiations between the global south and wealthier countries to create opportunities for collaboration? Because this is an opportunity where I think everyone agrees that jobs and green are things that go hand in hand. And I think the point on just is really important, because what we know right now is that for every 10 men that have a green skill, only 6 women have that green skill. So when we invest in green skills, can we do that in a way that also creates opportunities for women who have been historically left out of this opportunity? So I think, to the point, like, that's how if I was trying to make a pitch, it's not a perfect pitch, but I think it's a starting point for what's going to make the case for investments in TVET education.
Thank you very much. I wanted to say that we posted the session quite early on different online platforms, on LinkedIn obviously, but also on others, Instagram and Facebook pages, and we received a couple of questions. What I found very interesting is that some of these questions were quite personal, and we talked about that there might be 75 million job losses if we are going green, that people will have to be retrained. And so one of the questions we picked, which kind of I found very timely, was from a woman from Italy, and I think I'll give this question to Francesca. She was kind of asking that her brother worked in a coal mine in the Taranto steel plant in Italy, and she was wondering what kind of opportunities he would have to be retrained, given that he mostly did physical labor, given that he is someone whose skills is a quite physical skill set, and given a green transition, coal is probably gonna be not very much in demand anymore, and there's already a plan to lay a lot of people off. So her question was really kind of what kind of opportunities are there, and how can her brother be able to find a new job?
Yes, thank you. Well, that's a very interesting question, and that's the key question for, I would say, millions of people around the world. And there are examples in Italy which relates to the coal mine industry, but many other sectors which are also sectors which generate a lot of pollution. There are a lot of discussion going on about some of the sites in Italy, somewhere else, which have to be reconverted. So the answer to that is obviously a complex answer, because the question is very complex. I would love to tell you that the solution is to skill these people in a different way. That is part of the solution. of course, upskilling or even reskilling these workers to find them a new place in the society, in the economy, is one thing that needs to be done. But at the same time, it's not enough. You also need some demand side action. You need to have job creation in that area in different sectors, and you need to have different occupations required by the local market. So you need investments, you need financing, you need partnership of different actors, and overall, obviously, you need also a very clear vision from the government. I mean, let's keep in mind that I think that these days the role of the government becomes more and more important. The government has to drive the vision, the reconversion. The industry plays an important role too, but the government has really to drive the development vision of a territory, to regenerate the community, to provide communities with new opportunities. So to put it short, because really the question is very wide, I think that only with these sort of integrated measures where you have supply side actions, upskilling, reskilling for all workers regardless of their skills level, but also demand side measure, job creation, working with the private sector, incentives to migrate to new occupations. All of that has to be taken in a package.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Thank you very much, Francesca. I think looking for jobs is one of the, or having a job that's fitted with our skill sets is very important for us as individuals. It gives us satisfaction and it gives us a certain purpose as well. So LinkedIn, job search, Ephraim. Another question also from the audience online was, how can I find a job in the green economy? How can LinkedIn help me to highlight green skills? And how can it help me also to maybe find some retraining opportunities?
So I'll answer. I want to go back to the first question. I'll come back to this question because I think they go hand in hand. So one of the things that we learned at the onset of the pandemic, when we saw, say, food service and frontline retail jobs decline very quickly, was that there were other industries that were growing up. Think like digital customer service. And so one of the things that we've done at LinkedIn is we've developed a methodology that looks at the average skill profile of different jobs. And what we realized is that most workers in those jobs just think that if I'm a retail worker in one company, my next job is a retail worker in another company. They actually haven't realized that there are other jobs that may share 80% of the same skills as the job they're in right now. And so I think for the coal miner, a coal miner has a lot of skills that aren't just physical labor, but they may think that's all they have. And there are lots of other jobs that may be physical, but may not be, where they may share 60, 70, 80% of those skills. And having tools, LinkedIn built a tool called Career Explorer that helps workers see those skills for which they're similar and then look at the jobs that they can transition into is an important part. And that's often something that the private sector tools like LinkedIn can provide. Our job search functionality builds in that data, and it's something that government can do. When you go into a public employment service that's going to connect you with training opportunities, you want a public employment service that can say, here are the jobs that you have a lot of the skills already for, so here are the skills you have to learn to get that job. And I think that type of precision is going to increase the accuracy and time to get, and reduce the amount of time it takes for you to get that next job. So what's LinkedIn doing on this question? Because I think that was what folks, I think that question ironically came from someone on Instagram, but we won't hold it against them. There's a few things. One, for Earth Day earlier this year, LinkedIn built a tool that we have a green jobs collection. So you actually can go on LinkedIn today and search for green jobs. These are jobs that have green skills on them. Another thing that we actually just launched in September is a way for companies, employers, any employer, to commit to multiple sets of multiple values. Things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, work-life balance, things that we know are important to workers. Another thing we know that's important to workers, especially young workers, is working at a company that cares about the planet. And so today, companies can go and add a commitment to on their company page that says they care about environmental sustainability. And they have to show that they have some kind of existing public commitment to sustainability. And eventually, when enough companies do that, any job seeker is going to be able to go online and search for companies that have made a commitment to the planet. And we also know that upskilling is really important. And so LinkedIn now has 30 courses that are part of the LinkedIn Learning Library about green skills, and more are coming every week. And that's really exciting. And so that's automatically available to LinkedIn Learning customers. And we've also unlocked our green skills library for the next 2 months as part of our kind of COP engagement. So anyone who's hearing about green skills can go on LinkedIn Learning and learn some green skills. So I think those are some of the ways that if you're going to go on LinkedIn, you're going to be able to learn green skills that are relevant for your job, especially jobs where, I mean, look, you're not going to become a solar installer on LinkedIn. But if you're working in procurement, or if you're working in sales, which is a large part of the workforce, there's a lot of relevant green skills you can learn via online tools, and those are on LinkedIn right now.
Thank you very much. Before I change to my last question, I just wanted to, for those who did not come right at the beginning, say there's a QR code in my back because we've asked a question to the audience. Could you please give us a solution? What are the actions needed for greening jobs? What skills are needed to tackle the climate crisis? And I said before, we have 2 prizes, both include chocolate, and I think everybody needs a bit of a snack and a bit of sugar here. So if you want, scan the QR code, put your name down, and an idea for a solution how you can green jobs and how you can support a green transition. We will run the solutions down with the names, and then you can choose what you think is the most innovative solution. The last question goes to Hakyun. We spoke about the private sector. We spoke about that there's also, not only from the education side, but there's a need from the private sector side as well to want to drive this green transition. And it's sometimes also a bit of a challenging argument to make, because as a private sector company, I want to maximize profits. My main interest in the beginning would be making profit, and maybe then only secondary thinking about greening my company, having a greener jobs, or investing into R&D to look into greener technologies, because there is an investment that needs to be made at some point. So maybe from an ILO side, which is a tripartite institution, can you talk a bit more about how we can get the private sector on board?
So I think to answer that question, we first need to discuss what private sector we're talking about. The private sector is affected by green transition in different ways to a different degree. Let's say the renewable energy sector, they're already motivated to go green. It's there, we call them a green sector. But there are sectors like agriculture sector where the impulse, although the weather change and although the climate change is affecting a lot, the impulse there is still quite low. The motivation is quite low. So we have to look at how this employment policies, regulations, and green markets and innovation impose different motivation and obligation for different enterprises and sector. And I think that means we have like different approaches that we can engage the private sector. First of all, I think institutional setup is important. As ILO, including the social dialogue and public-private partnerships would be important to engage the private sector in this greening agenda. Another important aspect is that, of course, financial incentives. We need financial incentives to bring the enterprises to be on board. And in some countries, they already provide some subsidies for going green enterprise development and also for the training for some of those green skilling and upskilling and reskilling. And another important aspect is we can also approach at a sectoral level, bringing those who have the common challenges and common challenges and opportunities to address together, and especially it's relevant for those SMEs who have less capacity to deal with those investment needs and challenges. Last but not least, I think trade unions can play an important role to inspire the employers to be engaged in this process, and also to provide the skilling opportunities for workers, as providing the prospect for their personal development is one of the decent work aspect. So I think with that, we can maybe engage more further the private sector in this process. Thank you.
So with this one, I would like to thank our 3 panelists. I wanted to ask the technical department. If we could, in case we got some answers to our question. Here we go. Ooh. Nope. So I wanted to show some of the answers that we got from the audience about what can we do to promote a green transition. And I can also see that some answers got already some votes. So, okay. So I like this. This is a set, thank you. This is a set of questions and a set of answers. So one of the answers is carry out a gap analysis and bringing activities, circular learning, and making ESD more attractive and more relevant. And the whole school approach, let school itself shine. I love the last bit, let school itself shine. One of the other answers is that we need tools to give organizations the capabilities to analyze the workforce development requirements and align with net zero transitions across different job families. All jobs should be greener. I do not know how can we and then standardized educational system. Standard educational systems are slower than the labor market. How can we cope with such differences? I like the fact that there are also several questions being thrown in here. One of the answers is given is actually understand what a green job is. Well, that's a good one, right? What is a green job? What are green skills? How do we define a green job? Ephraim, how do we define a green job?
So the way LinkedIn describes, I think there's multiple ways to describe a green job. Some people might describe it by some estimate of the carbon emissions output of that job. We define a green job by the presence of green skills in the average skill profile of that job. We actually have multiple categories of shades of green. So a green job is a job that requires green skills to do that job. Those are probably jobs that we think of as obviously green. We then have, think about like all the solar installer, sustainability manager titles are in that category. We then have another category, which we'll call greening jobs. These are jobs that historically you haven't needed a green skill to successfully do, but they're the jobs that we see the most rapid growth of green skills in, that increasingly today you have to have at least one green skill to do that job. This is where things like procurement officer and fleet manager might show up. Then we have other categories, let's say a green potential job where it's much more nascent in terms of the green skills being deployed. You can think about this kind of a same category for digital where it's not yet required, the earlier days for digital skills being required. And then there's another category, which is the non-green jobs where we do not typically see green skills. So for us, it's exclusively about the presence of green skills in their profile. And just how we define a green skill, LinkedIn has 35,000 unique skills in our skills taxonomy. Of those 35,000 skills, we defined 800 green and green adjacent skills that we look for the prevalence of those skills in the skills profile of any title.
And before I announce the winner, I would like to pose one last question to the two ladies, because I found it a very interesting one. Someone, unfortunately I don't have a name, said, is green skills inclusive of indigenous people as they are the most affected? And I think this is a really, really interesting point that has been raised, because green skills needs to look at the ecosystem, the environment, at the different contexts where we need them. So maybe in all those foresight tools, skills anticipation tools, the TVET tool, how do we look at indigenous people? How do we look at people who also, like, I don't want to say you work with nature, who also have their income based out of nature?
Thank you. Well, this is a very timely question. This morning we were going around the pavilions and we we saw a fantastic VR organized by one of the UN agencies, which was about Fiji and the huge climate risk that they are facing in islands in the Pacific, such as Fiji. And obviously, when you have that experience, which, by the way, I advise to all of you, really go and have a look, it's fantastic, you see that people in these communities are terribly affected. And that has links to the technical skills they have, but it's also linked to, you know, the capability to manage, to mitigate, or to anticipate also the risk that the climate change can bring. So when we're talking about education in the European Union, about skills for the green transition, because now we more often talk about skills for the green transition rather than green skills, we talk about those skills which relate to the technical level, but also those skills that relate more to the change of mindset, change of attitudes. The JRC has recently worked on these key competencies, green competencies, and these put together, and I took note of them, action like skills such as acting for sustainability, envisioning sustainable futures, embodying sustainability values, and so on. So all of these elements also are strictly linked to the education system. When we anticipate needs, obviously we need to have a look at the specific context. When we run research on different sectors, we always start from a specific case. Not all solutions are good for a specific context. There is no one solution fitting all. So definitely the situation of indigenous people is one that worries us a lot. And also when you work with education and training and employment policy, you need to look specifically at the needs of this community, and then obviously develop some solutions that are fit for these communities.
Very quickly, just let me answer for the previous question on green jobs. At the ILO, we see green jobs as quality jobs that create to the greening of the economy, whether it's in the new sector, emerging sector, or whether it's in the traditional sector. And when we look at the enterprise level, that jobs may contribute to create and produce the environmental goods and services, but that may not necessarily, the process may necessarily accompany greening process. So we also have to look at those goods and services that is produced, but also went through greening processes, through green production, through green designing and delivery. So these are actually the aspect that we look at as green jobs at the ILO. And in terms of skills, at the ILO we call it skills for green jobs or greening jobs or skills for the green transition, because there are a lot of terms. And we call it in that way because in this transition we need not only the technical skills that are specific to the occupations, that we know the skills related to wind turbine, design, and etc. But at the same time, foundational skills, which is numeracy and literacy. Nowadays, I guess digital and environmental numeracy is also important, but also core skills. We call it core skills at the ILO, but sometimes you call it soft skills, those communication and teamwork skills that can help you to move around from one occupation to another, and from one sector to another. So this is, I think, important aspect that we look at the ILO, and yeah, I will stop here.
I'll just say real quick on indigenous communities. One of the things that frustrates me about the narrative around green transitions in indigenous communities is that they have a lot of skills they need to learn. I actually think indigenous communities have been doing circular economy forever. They are way less wasteful than us. And so when I think about what that means, I think we have a lot more to learn. So I had someone say that, you know, we should be getting less wealthy countries to export more natural resources. And I was like, no. We don't need that. We actually should be learning how to have less wasteful communities and societies, because that's what indigenous communities have been doing forever. And I think there's something about going back to nature that we could learn from those communities in a way that would probably benefit us all.
Okay, thank you all very much. So my closing remarks are, great question. Thank you very much. And then for the two winners for the voting, I wanted to know if Martin is in the room, Martin Baxter, and who you are, or if this was an online contribution.
And yeah, I'll just announce both at the same time. And then Carla also in the room? Okay, so I like it, a man and a woman. So Martin said as a solution, tools to give organizations the capabilities to analyze workforce development requirements, skills anticipation basically, with net zero transition. Yes, across different job families, all jobs greener. And Carla said standard educational systems are slower to evolve while the labor market moves faster, and we need systems that cope better with this transition. So thanks to both of you, and thanks to everyone else who responded online. ETF will take care of those who put the online questions. Let me give you to your bags with chocolate and other things. And let me thank to the panelists and everybody else for being here today.